get started, it's been requested that we'll call the meeting to order. It's been requested that we kind of go around and introduce ourselves and where we're from. So we'll start, I guess, down there with Chris.
Mike Withrow, City of Paris. Sorry. That's all right. Ron, we'll excuse you.
Kevin Howard, Berea Municipal.
Ed Fortner, Berea Municipal Utilities.
Rob Leesman, Owensboro Municipal Utilities.
Heather Overby, I'm the interim CFO for the Kentucky Municipal Energy Agency.
Doug Bursch, KyMEA CEO.
Ron Hurd, Chairman, KyMEA, and General Manager of the Corbin City Utilities.
Chris Melton, City of Madisonville, Kentucky.
I'm Charles Musson. I'm with the law firm of Rubin and Hayes and legal counsel for KyMEA.
I'm Josh Callahan, General Manager, Bartleville Utility Commission, Vice Chairman of KyMEA.
Next item on the agenda, we need to elect a new secretary. Do we have any nominations or anybody wants to volunteer?
Yeah.
I'll nominate Rob from Owensboro. Yeah, I don't think it's.
It does not have to be directed to be an alternate.
I'll second that if Rob's okay with that. Okay. I'll second the motion.
Well, if we don't have any other nominations, then by, would you call that by acclamation? We have a new secretary, Rob Leesman from OMU.
Congratulations, Rob.
Condolence.
Hey, Ron, who made the motion?
I made the
sorry.
nomination.
Sorry.
A motion, I guess. Or nominate.
Second.
Mike,
Mike, thank you.
Chris.
Okay, I'm not going to-
I answered anything.
Okay. We'll move on to the next item, the executive committee report. We have not had an executive committee meeting, so there is no report. We'll move on to the next item, the financial report. Who wants to, anything to address in that?
There is one change in the, it's coming up, in the format of the financial report. I know in the past we have given the board a financial report that has been dated as of the date of the actual meeting, and as staff and in consultation with Doug, we kind of decided that it just makes more sense and is cleaner to start providing a month-end report as of the previous month-end that is cleaner and less fraught with error. So this report is very similar to the previous one that you received on December 20th, the date of our last meeting. You've got a beginning balance here, ending balance in the checking account at Republic Bank of $447,303.29, and you've got about 107 of outstanding checks. In the future, there will be a second page of this that lists all of the operating expenses and checks that were written during the month. You've already seen all of these because they were listed on the last report, but I gave them to you again. So that is out on the portal for your review, and if anyone ever has any questions or comments about any of the checks. This also includes wires and ACHs. It's not just checks. Any cash outlay of KyMEA.
I'll make a motion, we accept the financial report.
I'll second that.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign. So approved. We'll move to the consent agenda. Oh, one other thing before we go on, we've got a lot of public here today, and we're not used to that. We don't get a lot of people at our meetings, but we want to welcome everyone. And we have a place at the end of the meeting for a public comment if anybody wants to make any comments or ask any questions. And there's you want everybody to sign up?
Anybody?
There's a sign-up sheet somewhere. Okay, by the door. We'll move to the consent agenda, the minutes from the December 20th meeting.
Make a motion to accept them as written. I actually read through them this morning.
Second.
Second by Chris. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. So approved. Discussion agenda, CEO update.
Oh, we didn't look at that.
You have to ask me later, I think, on the... It's that second one, yeah. All right, very good. My name is Doug Birch. I'm the new president and CEO of KyMEA, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm glad that we have a big crowd. That's great. Part of the presentation today is to kind of give people a feel for what KyMEA is, if you're not familiar with it, and who I am. So, of course, the board knows me, but I do have a part in here that kind of explains my background a little bit, and hopefully that's helpful as well. So, farm kid from Nebraska. So I grew up on a small farm, and we did the row crop things and cattle and hogs and all that fun stuff that farm kids do. So the little town I came from is 286 people, so I think I've always tried to understand how the local issues are as well as the big town issues, because I've lived in both. And I understand often there's some very bright people in a lot of different fields that maybe say, you know, I have a good understanding of the issues in my area, for instance, and how does this legislation or how does this policy or how does this whatever affect me? So we always try to balance those types of things as we look at a various number of members. In this case, the membership here, we said, how does it balance the needs of the big and small? For my education, a bachelor's of electrical engineering from the University of Nebraska, an MBA from Rockhurst University, which is in Kansas City, and a master's degree in electrical engineering from Kansas State University. So I picked up those degrees, some of them while I was working, and the bachelor's from University of Nebraska was the first degree I had right out of high school then. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Missouri and Indiana, and I'll work towards getting my Kentucky license as well. It's a pretty simple transfer. Once you have you pass the test, you just apply to the next state. For work experience, I started my career nearly 30 years ago at St. Joe Light and Power Company. It's an investor-owned utility. It's since merged with Kansas City Power and Light. But at the time, they were standalone, the smallest investor-owned utility in the United States, about 350 megawatts, very similar to the size of this agency. And I did resource planning. I was promoted to a senior planning engineer. Ultimately, I was promoted again to a director of fuels. So in that case, I went out and I would buy coal and natural gas and fuel oil, those types of things, and schedule the railroads. From there, I went on to Kansas City Power and Light. And at KCPL, I was back into resource planning, but also we got into the markets. And for those of you who have followed this industry along, generally it was at a point in time where utilities would sell to each other some kind of marginal cost plus an adder. In this particular case, as we progressed, then market-based rates came in, and energy trading and outside players that were non-utilities. and it became a very important point to be able to understand energy trading and how that affected utilities to optimize your portfolio. So that was in the late 90s when I was involved in both power marketing, resource planning for Kansas City Power and Light. From there, I went on to consulting. So for 10 years, I worked at Ventex ABB or some predecessor companies. And what we did there was we helped a lot of different utility types, non-utility types, with resource planning, market price forecasting, asset valuations, the types of things that said anybody involved in the electric industry. Did a lot of work also for maybe some government agencies as well. And that was very fulfilling because it was very interesting to go in and see the problems that a number of utilities would have locally for their resource plan, for instance, and help them work through the risk and uncertainty of that plan and have a good plan going forward. From there, I went to Indiana Municipal Power Agency, right to the north here, a very similar agency to KyMEA. And after that, I was involved in my own company, Horizons Energy, with a couple of partners, and we did back to the consulting world. And recently, a lot of that consulting had to do around renewables and non-utility players. There's a lot of companies that said, industrials, for instance, that said, I want to invest in renewables. How do you value that in the marketplace? So that's kind of a brief summary of my experience to date for the last nearly 30 years. I talked on a lot of these areas of expertise, but I know the people are always interested in what's an integrated resource plan and how does that work. Integrated resource plan, or also known as an IRP, is a long-term plan that you look at balancing supply and demand side issues, and you're going to look at risk and uncertainty around that. And I've done literally dozens of those for dozens of different companies over my last 30 years. And what we do is we come in there and we sit down with the senior staff and management and any directors and boards members they have, and we want to lay out their plan for the future. And we'll look out 10, 20. A lot of the studies I did recently, we go out to the year 2050, for instance. And we want to look far out to the future with an understanding that our projection isn't going to be perfect. In fact, we can't predict the future, but we want to understand the risk and uncertainty around that future by looking at lots of different scenarios and uncertainty analysis. So those are the types of areas of expertise that I had. On a personal note, I've been married for 33 years now. My wife, Beth, one son, Mitchell, and we're delighted to be here. We think we're very excited to be down here. We want to be part of every member's communities, and if you have any festivals or things that you think we should come to, we'd love to come there and be part of your community as well. My understanding is often there's some uncertainty when you start up a new agency like a KyMEA is, and there's some uncertainty in the member communities. The board certainly understands it, but often it's hard to convey just what exactly are we. The point I want to get across is, first of all, we're not alone. The map that we're looking at right here are joint action agencies similar to what we are across the United States. And in their golden day, they were started in the 70s and 80s. So most of these appeared in the 70s and 80s. There's 29 of them that were in the 1970s, 23 of them in the 1980s of this list, and there's probably in the neighborhood of 60 to 80 now. There's different varying degrees of big and small. I will point out on this map, TVA, I know people around here are familiar with them. They're not really a joint action agency, but they do serve a similar public function, so I put them on. SRP in Arizona, and BPA up in Washington. So they were kind of out of the point of when they were developed around water issues, either hydro dams or flood control or those types of things. But I didn't want to point this out. When people hear those names, they said, well, how do you compare? They're kind of a sister organization, but they're not the same as us. But all the groups that appear that appear on this map had a general idea, and that is they were individual municipalities that said we need to be joined together to be stronger so we can fight a bunch of battles. Now, their battles could have been with legislation and the local utility. It could have been transmission. It could have been they're trying to invest in a project. But they all had a very similar story to KyMEA, and that is we need to be band together, because if we do, we'll be stronger and we'll have a common goal of and do things with economies of scale. One of the things that I would always want to point out is this wasn't easy. And there were a lot of people that laid the groundwork back in the 50s and 60s and so forth to make this happen. The consultants that we have working for us right now, both on the law side, Spiegel McDermott, Enfront, Brown Thornton, as you know from New Gen Strategies, these are all people in their preceding companies or current companies that were involved in developing many of these joint action agencies. Very important point, because this is not easy work. There's a lot of pitfalls that if you don't do it right, you made a big mistake. So we have the right team of consultants in here to help us get started and build these. And so we're proud to have them. The progression of KyMEA, we actually maybe have a little more time than some have. As I researched that previous map, there was a number of people that had to make this happen very quickly. Our clock started with the 5-year notice. And if you look at this in terms of phases, let's call it 5 phases. There's an independence phase, a formation phase, a governance and development phase, management phase, operational phase. And these are phases of how do you go from starting with nothing, if you want to think of it that way, to becoming operational and delivering power. It was a bold move by the members to start with to say we need to have our independence from KU. And that move was, what do we need to do next? So they carefully thought about it. And I commend all the members that are sitting around here, and they thoughtfully went through the process of saying, I think we can do this cheaper, better, and serve our members and their customers much better if we're separated from an investor-owned utility that takes profit and become a nonprofit organization. And that was phase number 1. And everybody should be very proud that they started this organization at that time. The formation phase then becomes very important, and that is, okay, now we need to have bylaws, and we need to have governance, and how we're going to be governed, and how we're going to make sure the big players and the small players are treated fairly, but we keep sure we have the interest of each of those in mind. And so they came up with something that I always like to think of, just like the United States was founded 250 years ago, and that is at a Continental Congress. They brought colonies together. They talked about how they're going to have governance, and they said we're going to elect a president. We're going to have the Senate and the judicial system and so forth. Very similar to a process we would go through here to say we have voting rights. We're going to make sure everybody's treated appropriately, and this is the governance we have. So that was done in September of 2015. The next phase, the governance and development phase, is okay, now once we start establishing that, we need to have outside experts come in. And the outside experts we had come in on the legal side, Charlie and his team, and Tom Trogger, who are here today, they help lay out all the contracts and all the things that we have to interact with a number of government agencies, federal, state, and amongst the members ourselves. So they worked through that hard work. At the same time, we needed Enfront, we need New Gen Strategies to come up with a portfolio. And the portfolio that they came up with, imagine if you're a painter, you could come in with a blank canvas. He said, I have this canvas that's blank. What would I want to do to make this into a masterpiece? And that's the thought you would have in mind, saying, we want to have a diverse portfolio, we want it to be low cost, but we want to minimize risk. We want to look at different fuels. We want to look at different technologies. We want to understand that if we're too deep into any one of those, that we impose a risk. It could be a home run, or it could be something that doesn't turn out very well. So the idea would be, let's build a portfolio that has diversity. In this case, you'll notice we have coal, a natural gas combined cycle that we're looking at, solar that we're looking at, natural gas GTs for peaking needs, diesel GTs, hydropower. And if you look at that portfolio, there's a number of utilities out there right now that said, boy, I'd love to be able to get to that. It's just extremely difficult because of what I've already committed to. In our case, we're building a portfolio from scratch, and we're doing a very good job to make sure we minimize risk, we minimize the expense of that contract at the same time. And it's terrific. As I look through it, and I've done a lot of consulting through the years, this is a very good portfolio with a lot of diversity and a lot of flexibility. That was another key point of this. These resources are flexible. They give us the opportunity to take advantage of lower market prices if they exist. However, they're a backstop if market prices go high. So well done by the team involved. Brings us to the management phase. We've actually had a management phase, and it's sitting right to the right of me. Heather, she's done a great job of moving everybody forward here as the interim CFO. They've hired me to start. I started 25 days ago, so I'm new on the job here. But my job is, and you'll see the timeline here, we had 5 years and the clock started. We got 16 months left now. And that 16 months means we have to build an organization with the portfolio that we have in place, and we need to get to the operational phase. And that's going to click by really fast. Maybe 16 months sounds like a lot to some people. I can assure you that we have a lot of work to do ahead of us, but we're going to make it happen. And what we're going to do is we're going to start backwards from where we need to be May 1 of 2019, 16 months, work our way back and said, how are we going to get there? So it's going to be a very well laid out plan that we're going to follow to get to that point. So that's our operational phase. It gets us to deliver and power to our members. So as we talk about this management phase and the things that in the CEO report that I've been working on and where I'm working towards, first one's member outreach. I have a goal to go out and meet each member community at least once over the next 6 months and multiple times if you'd like me to be there. And I'll talk about everything that we're working on to things that we're doing. Open, transparent communications is very important. We also have a deadline. We need to get to our operational date, and so everybody needs to be aware that we're going to be moving pretty fast on some things because we have to. This is very important. We're going to lay out an organizational chart, and that'll be the next slide we'll look at here in a second, but we're going to have, no, it's fine. We'll have professional staff, so we're going to lay out, I worked on the titles, the duties, the timing of their hiring, and we get to that next slide, we'll talk about that as to the board. Branding and marketing. We need an identity, and if you looked at all that map we had before of all those joint action agencies, they have a strong identity. They have a mission statement. They have a vision. They said, where do we want to be? If you are familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, it's a class I took back when I was at St. Joe a long time ago, and it still sticks with me. One of those habits was begin with the end in mind. Those joint action agencies that have been around for 50 years now, if you can look at, if they can look back, they said, wow, are we proud of what we did? Are we proud of the step that we took to get to this point? Begin with the end in mind. In our case, we're going to begin with the end in mind in our marketing and branding to say, where do we want to be 50 years from now? What kind of agency do we want to be? There can be a great deal of pride of people in the future. I can guarantee you they're going to look back and say, I wish I was part of that original group that started this, because look what they created. Just like the United States government, how that survived for 250 years. The same thing holds with these joint action agencies. They create something that lives on for the next generations to come. They're mobile, they're able and flexible, they're able to change directions, and that's the branding we're going to have in mind, saying where do we want to be as we go through our progression into the future. A number of policies we're going to have to work on, the line between board and management and the governance. It needs to be clearly spelled out so everybody understands their roles in this organization. Risk management's a key part of it. The risk has to do on both the personnel side, from our operational side, from the financial side. We're going to make sure that we're well covered and we're not risking the company, but we're going to take a calculated risk in terms of making sure our rates are low when they need to be. So there's a balance of risk and reward, and we'll certainly spell that out for the board and make sure we're well aware of it. Personnel-wise, we're going to have policies around that as well, and clearly we're going to be a small staff, so we'll outsource some of our human resource needs and get outside expertise. As we become operational, and we're going to talk about some of this today, we'll develop a budget and rates. We're going to talk about indicative rates today, and that is the preliminary look at what the rate structure looks like. And ultimately, we're going to get that to member delivery. So we need to get it to the members. We need to meter what we sell to you, and we need to have payment that comes back. So it's a very strong process of saying, how do we get to this operational phase by building this organization? Good. So what I'd like to present to the board today, and this is a preliminary org chart pending your approval and any discussion you have on it. And it's an org chart that was actually laid out early on before I ever started, and with a few modifications. So it starts with the president and CEO, the one position we have right now. Heather serves as our interim CFO, so that's a very similar box onto here, a vice president of finance and accounting and the CFO. I will say the job titles are subject to change based on qualifications and experience. So I laid these, the blue boxes out as vice president levels, that layer, but they might be director levels, manager levels, depending on the type of experience and qualification we have. The first hire that I'd like to make, though, is the office manager, executive assistant to the president. This person is going to wear a lot of hats. And they're going to be a liaison to a number of things as we develop the organization. I'm going to depend on this person not only to do a lot of the clerical work and receptionist type work that would be associated with maybe the executive assistant position, but also work with human resources, outside agencies in that regard. We're going to have an IT infrastructure we need to work with, any type of building support and insurance and all those things. And so this is going to be a very valuable position that I'm going to ask later for approval from the board, and that'll come as an action item. The next layer down in orange, we're going to call future positions. I've done a lot of research in the organizations our size, and a lot of times they'll maybe sit in the neighborhood of 10 people, some more, some less. I want to start off lean, see what we can get by with as few people as possible, but there's a lot of complexity to running an organization like this. And I don't want to take a shortcut in areas where we don't want to take a shortcut. That is, if it's very important to attend a lot of different meetings at MISO, the RTO operator, and we need to have a staff dedication to that, or we need to outsource that, we want to work through those issues, for instance. Because if you miss out on a meeting, you might miss out on something very important that involves tens of millions of dollars, for instance. So I don't want to sell ourselves short in terms of staffing because that's minuscule compared to overall running of the agency. So I'm going to call those future positions, and they're fluid. They could be subject to change, but I just had a drop-down box to each of those departmental heads. The gray areas are areas that I intend that we would outsource. The scheduling, dispatching, market trading, that's a 24-hour operation, and that 24-hour operations would probably take us 6 staff members. There's a lot of very good companies that do this on behalf of Joint Action right now, and even cooperatives right now. We'll take a look at what their capabilities are, what their costs are, and we'll weigh that against pulling that internally. But they have a lot of expertise, and they have a very deep bench, meaning if we hired a staff of 5 on a rotating 24-hour shift and someone moved on, we have a hole in that staff, and it gets very difficult to train and replace. And so I'm familiar with that different structure, and right now I would say, outsourcing that might be the best way to go. Transmission, metering, NERC compliance, those are very specific skills that it's best to outsource. Our financial advisor, the same type of skills, and of course legal counsel. That we have Charlie, and right now we intend on keeping that as an external resource. So that concludes Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. Is there any discussion about any of the presentation amongst the board? Yes.
Yeah, I have a comment. Ed Fortner from Berea. Great presentation, Doug. Very impressive. On your timeline, I guess I just wanted to add that it's certainly accurate to begin that with the termination of all the municipals of our KU contracts back in 2014. But I just wanted to make it clear to some of the audience members who may not realize that the relationships around on this board with these sister cities has gone back decades, and also with Spiegel, McDermott, and Brown and others for many, many years, and trusted consultants and a very cooperative, mutually beneficial relationship with the sister city utilities over the many years. And there was a lot of work that actually happened in 11, 12, and 13 leading up to the start of that timeline in particular. So just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. There's nothing else on that. We'll move on to the interim CFO update. Heather?
Mine is not as impressive as Doug's. I want that noted. I was not aware that Doug was doing this great presentation. Mine is a little bit less spectacular. Okay, so this is just what's been going on in the financial world of KyMEA since December 20th. Doug got a payroll check. That's exciting. It's exciting for him, I'll guarantee that. Yeah. And this may sound like, oh wow, Heather, everyone gets a payroll check. you got to understand, this was a blank sheet of paper as of December 20th. There was nothing. So we had to, it sounds like, oh, okay, you just write a check. No, you need 4, 5, 6 different federal and state ID numbers, with all your withholdings and, everything that goes with that. It's a lot. So I'm pretty proud of that, actually. Pretty proud. I know Doug's pretty proud too. Yes. Okay. So biweekly payroll periods going forward from this. We are in the process of investigating our retirement benefit providers. We have a quote from ADP who's doing the payroll. They don't really meet all of the qualifications and benefit options that Doug and I would like to see. So we're also going to get, we've got a conference call with Hilliard Lyons tomorrow to see what they can do for us. And I've got a call into the Kentucky Deferred Comp and to see what they can do for us. So if any of the board members have any ideas about other firms that you would like to see us investigate, give myself or Doug an email, and we'll be happy to do that. We want to get that plan in place ASAP because, we need to start making contributions, and I'm sure Doug would like to start making his contributions. So that is #1 priority to get done right now. Okay. Member assessment and statements went out the beginning of January. Member statements through 12/31/17. That means we bill assessments on a quarterly period based on the budgeted overhead of the agency. And then we track by member exactly how much you have left in the assessments that you have paid. So it's not just this rate that goes into this black hole. At the present, we can tell with the startup period assessments, we can tell exactly how much Berea has and how much they've paid and how much of the overhead costs were related to Berea and how much they have left in their pot to save.
I describe that as the next billing period being reconciled to actual cost.
Yes. Yes. And so those statements went out through 12/31. They're out. You also got a new assessment, which covers the period, the third quarter of the fiscal year, January 1st through March 31st. So thank you to quite a few people have already paid. That's extremely exciting to me. So thank you for that. Questions on assessments, statements? Okay. A little note about, to take back to your member utilities on the banking relationship and the remittance. We no longer have any banking or credit card relationship with BB&T. If you were one of the board members that had a BB&T credit card, you can destroy that. We are completely with Republic Bank now, and that is because our line of credit is there. Thank you for all your electronic payments. Wire and ACH are certainly preferred methods of payment rather than a paper check. Remittance instructions, if you need them, are on the bottom of any invoices, and of course you can always contact me. Please update your accounting system vendor records with the current address and bank information. Charlie is receiving some remittances still. So he overnights them to me. It's not a big deal, but I'm sure we would like to take that step out of them. If you want to mail your check, mail it to me.
You mind telling us who's mailing our bills to you? Is it Berea?
No.
Okay.
Not anymore.
Good.
Not anymore.
I thought we corrected that.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking.
And obviously, if you would like me to automatically ACH your any of your bills, just shoot me an email. I'm going to need authorization every single time. Just shoot me an email saying, hey, Heather, can you ACH this from our account? I'll be glad to initiate that on my end.
Just make sure I heard what you said. It's not an automatic. You have to have authorization from them every time.
Exactly. I just shoot me. I want an email every single time, and I will keep those in the records so that if there is any kind of question, we have exact authorization and who did it and when it happened and for the amount. Yes. Yep. Questions, comments? Okay. Short and sweet.
Thanks, Heather. Any other questions on that? We'll move on to the review of the KYMEA contracts by Frankfort.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to make sure the board is fully aware, the KYMEA received resignation letters of the two representatives, the director and the alternate from Frankfort this week, and since the Frankfort Plant Board has not met to my knowledge, has not met and made nominations of a new director and an alternate, I'm going to fill in here where Frankfort would normally give an update regarding some of the review of contracts by KYMEA. As you all know, Frankfort is undertaking through the commission of a contract with the law firm Reed Smith, a study of the KYMEA existing contracts with Frankfort. As you all requested, we asked to participate in the discussions with that law firm back in April or September. August or September, and we were advised that the Frankfort Plant Board did not think that was appropriate. We do, just for your information, understand that a draft of that report has been received now by the Frankfort Plant Board members, and if there is no objection, we will once again ask Frankfort to send us a copy of that final report once it's received so that we can review it on behalf of KYMEA. So if there's no objection, we'll request that final report when it's issued. There was also, at a recent Frankfort Plant Board meeting, a concern that Frankfort's requests or motions or questions were not being delivered to this board. And in particular, there were some questions regarding certain action items that Frankfort asked the board to consider. The board actually did consider those in August of 2017, actually took votes on a number of those issues, and we will make sure that members of the Frankfort Plant Board receive copies of those minutes showing those. Finally, the only other thing that was important at the Frankfort Plant Board meeting the other night was a request, or they are reviewing entering into a member-owned resource contract for their SEPA allocation. The rest of you here have already entered into those. Those that have SEPA allocations have entered into those with KYMEA. The reason that I'm bringing this up is there is an issue as our present transmission arrangements with KU, LG&E are concerned. We have stated that the Frankfort SEPA allocation of 15 megawatts, approximately 15 megawatts, will be part of that transmission arrangement. If Frankfort decides that they are not going to be entering into the SEPA contract with KYMEA, we will probably have to ask for modification of that transmission arrangement with LG&E and KU, and Brown Thornton is the expert on this and certainly can answer any questions regarding that. The problem is if we have a timing issue. If we go back to LG&E and KU, they may request a transmission study, which could take as long as 240 days. These contracts that you all have entered into, you're expecting to operate under those contracts in May of 2019. So it is probably appropriate, Mr. Chairman and Mr. President, that notification be made to the Frankfort Plant Board that if they do not act on their SEPA contract by April 1, we will have to assume that Frankfort is not going to be entering into that SEPA contract with KyMEA in order that the remaining members on this of KyMEA will be able to receive their SEPA contract benefits that they've entered into. If Frankfort, at a later date, a year from now, decides that they want to come and enter in that SEPA contract, they certainly could. They may end up having to pay an additional $30,000 for a transmission study to get back onto the LG&E grid. So the notification is to just make sure that Frankfort understands the potential problems if they decide not to enter into the contract.
Charlie?
Yes.
Just for clarification, if they don't meet that deadline and come back later, the payment under that contract, it's a member-owned contract, member-owned resource contract with the agency, which is based on the avoided cost of the agency. And the contract that's now on the table, which has a lot of value to the members who have signed it, is based on the avoided cost of the planning resources and the planning that assumed there would be SEPA resources at the time the portfolio was being, the initial part of the portfolio was being assembled. A year from now, the SEPA member-owned contract might look very different because the agency's avoided costs might be very different. So that's something that, you know, I want to be sure that people in Frankfort are aware of and take into consideration as they think about this.
The other thing needs to be, clearly understood is the $30,000 payment that you talked about for a transmission study. That's for an LG&E KU study, not anything associated with KyMEA. So it's a cost that any transmission owner would have to go through to add back SEPA as a resource.
So, Doug, do you have any thoughts on notifying Frankfort and making sure that they understand their position?
This is obviously a great benefit for Frankfort themselves. It's a lot of money, and so I want to make sure they're fully aware that and give them every opportunity to sign up for this. So we'll make sure we have a good line of communication. I want to make sure they don't leave money on the table. So,
Well, Mr. Chairman, if it's motion of the board to notify Frankfort would be appropriate at this point in time.
So we're looking for a motion.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
What would you like the motion to say?
Just notifying Frankfort
Notify
of
SEPA
the
resource contract.
about issues relating to the SEPA resource
April 1st deadline.
with an April 1st deadline.
I can't say. What else do you want me to write?
Regarding the SEPA contract. And asking and notifying them that KyMEA needs final notification of their intentions by April 1, 2018. Of April 1, yeah.
Yes?
You got
What?
the extra one in there.
Oh,
That's a long time out.
you know what I mean.
Some deadline.
I want to give you plenty of time. And Ron, who made the motion?
I made the motion.
Thank you.
Josh.
Do we have a second?
Mike seconded.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Uh,
Any opposed, like sign.
That's it, Mr. Chairman.
So approved. We'll move on to the transmission arrangements.
Okay.
Who wants, Brown or Tom going to address that?
I'll start that. Just to give you guys an update, we are kicking off this month working with KU and LG&E on the delivery point transition plan. Just to be clear, that is arranging for metering and telecommunication at each of the roughly 20 delivery points on the KyMEA transmission service arrangements. We've got about 16 months to get roughly 18 to 20 delivery points done. So that's not a lot of time. So we're busy trying to kick that off this month. Number 2 is the arrangements for the city of Falmouth. In fact, reiterating what we've covered in some previous meetings, they are the lone member that have not only transmission facilities associated with LG&E KU, they also have a line that feeds them that's connected to East Kentucky. Oh, you want me to move to the mic? Sorry. I'll move to a mic. On the city of Falmouth, they are the lone member that have a transmission connection that involves East Kentucky transmission system as well as the LG&E KU. So we're in the process of getting arrangements in place to take care of that. It will involve PJM as well as East Kentucky because they are a member of PJM. As far as MISO, right now all of our arrangements in MISO are in place, and I know of nothing really that needs to be done there, except we are in the process of revisiting all of the, not just in MISO, but also on the LG&E side. As Charlie alluded to, we're in the process of reviewing with LG&E all the loads and the resources that are in the transmission service arrangements to make sure that the final contracts as they were negotiated align with the transmission service dates. So you may see a report later on that, maybe next month. Any questions on those items?
Brown, I know you and I discussed it, but on number 1, Berea's got a unique situation in regards to becoming an AMP member in 19, and I just wanted to remind you that we need some unique attention similar to what Paris guidance was given.
We're good, right? I mean,
Right. Paris and Benham today are receiving transmission service from under the KyMEA transmission service arrangements. And both have power supply arrangements with AMP. Paris has got a 2-year bridge arrangement to put them in sync with the rest of the members May 1 of 19. But similar to what we did at Paris, Paris has 4 delivery points that were set up under the KyMEA transmission service arrangements with the metering and the communications set up with AMP. We'll do the same thing for Berea's 2 delivery points.
Yeah, I think specifically KU need to nail down KU and their requirements.
Correct. They generally they like their own dedicated communications path, which was a little bit different than what we did for Berea.
But that's not clearly stated, I don't believe, in their OATT or whatever document.
It's a little vague, so that's one of the things we're working through. Any other comments, questions?
Where are we at on meters? Is that all worked out?
Currently, I'm working with a couple of folks to define what we want in our metering. Barring any, objections, we're probably going to go with something very similar to what we did, what AMP did at Paris. Those are good proven meters. They've got a lot of flexibility relative to the outputs that are needed to go to KU as well as the energy services provider, whether it's KyMEA's energy services provider or AMP's.
At a reasonable cost, I guess I might add, from what I understand, Mike.
yes.
Well, and each delivery point will be a little different. And what I mean by that is, in some cases like Paris, there was a KU substation nearby, and KU wanted to, via a SCADA radio, get those meters to their substation to get on their energy management system. So that was the arrangement at Paris. That won't be the case in many of the other ones. We'll have to work out, for example, I know that at Bardwell, it's a single delivery point, small system, and they'll probably have a dedicated communication channel back to KU, as well as back to us.
Yeah, Brown, do we expect any communications problems at are there areas that are be difficult for us to get a good signal or.
We are working now to define kind of a template, if you will, for each of the delivery points.
Okay.
In fact, for example, I've talked several times with Chris about Madisonville. They envision a fiber link between theirs to get all together and then send it off.
Okay.
That won't be that easy to do in some of the other places.
Okay.
Brown, it will be just a little bit different from the arrangement that we currently have with Benham and Paris, in that KyMEA will own the meters and they'll be
Correct.
fixed assets of the agency?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay? All right, thank you.
There's nothing else on that issue. We'll move on to action items. Purchase of vehicle for the president, CEO. You want to address that, Doug?
Yes. Okay, so I have, I guess, 3 consecutive action items here. The first one's the purchase of a vehicle for my use. Since we don't have a purchasing department, OMU offered up their purchasing department. We were happy to have the help. And so a vehicle was selected from the Kentucky State contract list. They had a list of different types of vehicles that we could select from, and I selected a Ford Edge off of that list. The description's up on the board and in the board packet as well. And so if there are no questions, I'd like to move forward with that purchase. It's a 12 to 14 week delivery time for it, so I've been driving my own car in the interim, and I will until then. But I would like to kind of get this rolling if we can.
Those prices have gone up from last year. I purchased a couple of Edges that were a little less than that. That's the state contract price?
Yeah, and it beats, so I did some research into non-state contract, and it's a good price.
It's a good value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said you bought some Edges? For real?
I make a motion to approve the purchase of the vehicle.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. So approved.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the next one is branding and website. And this is actually a process that was started prior to me coming on board. But it's something we need to really get moving with. And that is, my first week on the job, I went out right away and I grabbed our domain name. So KyMEA.org was available. And I went through and grabbed that name, so it's now ours to make sure we have it. But that's the last of my skill for building a website. So, and there is no website. It works for email. So I reached out to to one of the firms that we reached out earlier and that Heather talked to. It's KSD, Kinetic Strategic Design. Barberville's using this firm as well, I believe, for some work they're doing. And had a phone interview with the president, and Heather also had a phone interview, and they seem to really have a good handle on what we're trying to do. So, really, we're not a business in the sense that we go out and we're looking for customers or trying to sell a product. What we're trying to promote is our vision, where we're going to be in the future, have it so our members can go to this site and see the members prominently displayed on that site as well, and have this collective, here's who KyMEA is. And it's always the tough battle of saying, well, that's KyMEA and we're one of the members. We're all in the same. KyMEA is the membership, governed by the members. And that's very clear that this particular firm understands that, and they'll help us get that message out. So the 2 things that we're going to require from them is, first of all, branding. We're going to need a logo and some kind of branding message that they're going to help us work through to try to capture what we're looking for. The second one is the design of the website. And the design of the website that I'm really looking for is one that we can also upkeep ourselves. So this office manager position I talked about would be able to go in and put a new photo if we had a board member change, put a new photo and new information around them regarding that. If it's something more elaborate, then we'd go back to a firm like this and have them and make those appropriate changes. And that's the design they laid out for us as well. The third thing I talked to him about, but it's not part of this proposal, and that is a lot of joint actions do this, and I'd like to encourage us to do it as well, and that is we would create a video about who we are, what our services are. You'll all be on camera, so if you're excited about that opportunity or not excited, we'll see where we go from there. But if you've ever been around these joint actions like I have through the years, and you always want to hear the war stories about the Founding Fathers and the things that they did to get this off the ground, there's nothing better than interviewing them right now, so later on we can all understand the process they had to go through, the vision they had, and where they wanted it to be. You know, a lot of times you wish you'd have done that in your own personal life, saying, boy, I wish I'd had Grandpa on the camera years ago, that type of thing. Well, I guess we'll all be the grandpas someday. So we'd like to get this on camera, just to talk about the formation. So that's something we can leave for a later date. It's not part of this proposal, but they have the expertise to do that as well. And so that's where we're at. So what I'm asking for action today on is for them, their contract is $18,500. We would kick it off immediately in February. And they anticipate the final visuals, things would be done in September. If we move quicker, it could be done before then. But I expect there's going to be, they had 3 meetings set up in there for some face-to-face meetings, so some back and forth. What we'd like to get is preliminary designs, bring it to you, see what you think in terms of the direction we're going, and have some of that interaction as well. So that's the action item I requested, Mr. Chairman.
Doug, I was wondering, looks like the deliverables are pretty clear here. Is there any discussion about ongoing support, or it sounds like we were going to try to maintain the website in-house, but for future engagements, do they have a base hourly rate, or how might that?
They do have a base hourly rate that's part of this, based on their services from it's between $55 an hour and $95, depending on
I
what
didn't know
we're
if
doing.
that was just for these.
Yeah, no, but that'd be for the ongoing support as well, And they, so I tried to keep the scope so it's was around that, but I always anticipate this will be a partner company with us. Mm-hmm. If they do a good job here and we're happy with them, we would want to partner. We're going to have to create soon an annual report, for instance. So when we get an annual report after our first year of operation, those types of things, we're going to want a partner company for that as well.
I don't know this outfit firsthand, but to be clear, I think I'm the one that recommended this group just based on a presentation they had given at a KMUA meeting on the work they had done for Barberville, and I was very impressed with their fiber project down there. So
yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up. So I appreciate the recommendations. I actually asked them for references and asked them for websites they designed, and he was happy to give me a long list of those. And I haven't tracked down all the references, but I certainly went to all the websites they designed to say, is this the look and feel that we like? And I gave him examples of the look and feel that I like to start with. So it seems like we're on the same page. So, I think this is a good partner for us.
I'll make the motion that we accept this quote or this arrangement. I think obviously it's your recommendation, Dave, that this is the right time to begin this branding process.
Yes.
I'll second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. So approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My third action item then had to do with the topic I brought up earlier, and that is staffing. The staff position, can you bring that up? Sorry, it's So I wrote up a job description actually for the entire first bar of that org chart that I didn't present it to you yet, but the staff position is this office manager, executive assistant to the president. The job responsibilities are varied. I think if we find the right person, this is going to be a terrific job for them. I think personally, a lot of people like that, the ability to do a lot of different things, and that's what we're going to want. President and CEO executive support, and I have a list of items here, obviously not all inclusive, but these are the general things. where this person will serve as both a receptionist to greet people as they come in, given our limited staff size, but also do a lot of the clerical phone work and hopefully be very good at PowerPoint and Word and those types of things as well. So there's a wide range of skill set that's needed in this particular regard. On the clerical administrative duties, that's going to extend to the entire office staff once we get that filled, and they help with photocopying, faxing. There's a lot of requirements that have to do with in and around record retention, for instance, and we're going to have to get a good system in place to say we need to keep good records, whether we put on, what is microfiche or whatever the different technologies are out there to make sure.
I don't think it's microfilm.
What's it called? Microfilm?
That's a little outdated.
Okay. Well, clearly I'm out of my league on that one. So whatever we put it on, it's not stone and chisel.
Yeah.
So they'll help with that process. The next thing, Heather. Accounting department support. If we have a thin accounting staff, this person can help out as well with some of the accounting, invoicing, those types of things. I'll call it maybe almost a bookkeeper type role, but that'll be support for the accounting department. And then this last one is this liaison function. And this function could be anywhere from web support, IT support, web design, going out to the member communities and taking a photograph of a new board member, for instance. It could be those types of things. The things we want to put on the website could fall into that, or could fall into the firm we're hiring. So there'll be some mix around there. The insurance issues, human resource issues are something we'll need to work through, and I'll certainly need some support around that on maybe some of the more routine calls that are around that. Office equipment, copiers broke, we need some help on there. So those types of things. And any other special projects as assigned. So the education experience, I was thinking a 2-year certificate for this particular job. Obviously, if there's more education that goes with it, that's fine. A couple years of experience doing this type of work. Proficiency in Microsoft Office, that's what we'll have in our office. And the ability to be able to type and have clerical aptitude tests, so we'll have that as well. The salary range, I've done some research for this particular job, and depending on qualifications, anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000 seems to be the right range and appropriate there. So I'm just asking for a range today. A valid driver's license and the ability to stand, sit, walk, lift up to 20 pounds, those types of things would be the physical requirements of the position.
Doug, I noticed there was no reference to travel. Do you envision travel being involved with this position?
I guess I haven't thought a lot about that. If this position would go to all the board meetings, I think they probably would. So yeah, travel is maybe something I need to add on there, just so everybody's clear. I did expect as we go out to member meetings, for instance, that this position may accompany me and staff as well. Past experience has shown that actually does happen, where office staff will go accordingly to some of those things. So let me add that to that description.
Do you also need to add a salary range, Doug, you think, or?
I can. This is a job description that the ones I'm familiar with generally don't have a salary range on it, but I'll leave it.
Okay, yeah, no, that's fine.
What was, you probably had it in here, but are you looking for action on this today to begin advertising?
Yes. I'd like to begin advertising and look to hire. So I'm looking for approval to actually hire the position, yes.
And I'm supportive of that. Have we nailed down benefits for this and other positions? Because that's going to be a question that's going to come up if you're going to advertise right away.
It's a tricky one. I can't get group benefits until I have at least 2 employees.
Chicken and egg.
I am one. And in fact, this is almost, I'm going to clearly spell it out to this person that we're going to, give a contribution to any health insurance. But and I've had assurances from some of these people, health insurance people, that they can move pretty quickly once we hit the magic number of 2. So it's kind of circular there.
Understood. Okay.
But yeah, right. And the benefits that we laid out are the same ones that the board talked to me about, is the contribution to employees, premium payments and so
Yeah, we
forth.
talked about that when we were discussing benefits for your position, that they kind of be a template for other positions
Right.
in general.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to follow. Are there comments or questions?
I move that we support this action with the recommended additions for travel and then whatever, I don't know what we think about advertising pay range, that type of thing. I'll make that motion, as vague as it sounded.
Ed, I think the thing to do would be to allow Doug to use the range, depending on the experience level of the person, would be the way to do it, and not necessarily publish it.
So authorize Doug to
Yeah.
handle that.
Actually, he has the authority. Just so the board is aware, under Doug's contract, he has the authority to hire the person once the position is authorized.
Okay.
Oh, do I need to write the range on here, Charlie?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, the board needs to authorize the positions. That's the,
I'll second that motion.
Any more discussion?
It doesn't need to say and advertise to hire. I mean, that just says approves the description, right?
That's covered.
Yeah, I think
So the
if
bylaws
approve the
cover
position,
that.
yeah.
So that's all our
Right.
role is to approve
Yeah.
the position.
Right.
Okay.
Does the board approve the pay range too, or how's that?
If, with the understanding that the 30 to 50,000 range is what Doug would work with. If, for example, he found a candidate that required $60,000, my recommendation to Doug would be to contact the executive committee at that time and discuss it with the executive committee, and they could make the decision, either bring it back to the board or move forward. But I think if you've given him the range, he has the ability to.
So does that range need to be stated in the motion?
It wouldn't hurt.
Probably should.
So Heather, if we put that into,
I'm sorry, I'm updating attendance. I'm
that's
sorry.
fine.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Just add the range, the pay range to the motion.
So
Do you want-
just put salary range 30 to 50,000.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, like sign. So approved.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my action items.
We'll move on to implementation of the PURPA plan. Mr. Trauger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can be very brief. As the board will recall, you have approved about a year ago something called a joint PURPA implementation plan. PURPA refers to the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act, a federal statute that provides for the encouragement of small renewables and cogeneration projects to be introduced into the marketplace and have the opportunity to participate in the marketplace. And each of the members is currently subject to the PURPA requirements. The joint implementation plan for PURPA was developed to be a streamlined, sensible way for the members to coordinate with the agency, since the agency is going to be doing the power supply, to coordinate the compliance with PURPA. As I say, that's been approved, so there's no action required on that. you might want to put up the resolution, because the only thing the board is being asked to do today is to move to the next step of getting formal approval for the implementation plan. The plan needs to be approved by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And it will be submitted in a filing to them. And accompanying that filing will be recognition that this board has approved it, and it will also include a formal resolution from each member that wants to take advantage of the opportunity to participate in the plan as an authorizing participant. So the action today is simply to remind yourselves, in effect, that the agency, you members are reminding yourselves that we need to round up resolutions from each member that wishes to participate. Those of you who are all requirements members have already approved the filing of the request at FERC to go through the steps necessary to have it be approved by FERC. But the new resolution will add to it'll support the FERC filing.
But Tom, it's not mandatory for the transmission-only members?
It's not mandatory for anyone. It's an opportunity. What happens is, instead of the individual member having to respond when if a person comes forward to your community and says, we'd like to build a certain project and we'd like to have it be supported by you in the way that PURPA requires, what the plan does is it gets FERC approval for that to be bumped up to the agency, and the agency takes on all of the obligations of working out the contract and the details and the specifications for the project. The other piece of it is that the PURPA requires you to buy from a qualifying facility. It also requires that the local utility or the relevant utility support it in terms of providing interruptible service or full service, whatever the project needs. So what the joint plan does is spell out, well, who's responsible for what piece of that? And the way it would work is that the obligation to buy moves up to the agency level where the power supply planning is going on, and the obligation to sell, if it's a project that's in your local area, there would be a commitment. There's a commitment by each authorizing member that, yes, we will fulfill our obligations under that. So it's not required, but it's also available. It's available, for example, for OMU. You don't have to be an all requirements member if you want to have the agency take on that kind of burden. So, and it'll be available to Berea as a all requirements member. It sort of simplifies the life on the local community level, and also for those who are all requirements members, your PURPA requires that you buy the power from the facility at your avoided cost. And as a all requirements member, your avoided cost after you start taking power from the agency is the agency's avoided cost. So that's also important. It's not changing the whole, it doesn't in any way change the opportunity for the developer of a PURPA project or a qualifying facility in terms of what they're entitled to, because they would get the agency's avoided cost under PURPA regardless of whether you wanted the agency to take over the red tape aspects of getting the project going or not.
So this is a template resolution for each member of the agency to use?
No, this is a resolution simply for this board to invite the members and remind them, and we put a 60-day in the agenda items in your packet. The PURPA plan's in your packet, and also a draft of the filing that we would make at FERC. And this is just a resolution of this board to say, hey folks, let's get out there and round up our resolutions in the next 60 days so we can get this, just check this box off on the PURPA plan.
And it also, we will provide form resolutions to each of the member agencies, and as this resolution says, if you need Doug or any other person to come and make a presentation to your board.
I don't believe it fits Berea. We can talk offline, yeah. Tom, but that's the reason I was asking.
Right. So that's all that this is just the next step in the process for PURPA.
So we're looking for a motion to approve the resolution to implement the PURPA plan.
So moved.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. So approved. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Next item is a brief overview of KyMEA. Mr. Painter is going to address that for us.
Before John gets started then, in my CEO presentation, I gave what I'll call the 30,000-foot level of joint action agencies in terms of who else has started those. Excuse me. And, so we're not alone in this world, right? So there's others that have kind of plowed the path ahead of us. This is going to be a little deeper dive into exactly what this means for individual members and kind of talks through the mechanics of it a bit. John's been doing this a long time. He's got a great deal of experience around joint action agencies, and it gives a very good presentation and overview. Okay, sorry. So go ahead, John.
You want to drive? If that'll make it easier. I don't want to make it more complex.
I would be happy to drive for you
Okay, well,
if I need to.
we'll see how it works.
Works.
I feel a little bad, but I don't know how to get to a microphone and be seen by everybody in the room. So we wanted to take a few minutes as a precursor to the next agenda item to just kind of review a little bit more in depth how we got where we are and what we're trying to accomplish as a group. So I want to talk about and hone in on the business structure changes that are occurring May 1st, 2019, and then talk a bit about how the organization came about, how it's structured, what the latest update on the power supply arrangements, and then the projected benefits and what those benefits are to the members. This chart has been shown in several presentations, so many of you might have already seen it. In delivering power all the way to the customers in a city like Frankfort, there's 3 distinctly different business units that have to function together to get that done. One is a power supply entity, then a transmission entity to move the power from where it's produced to the distribution system. And then there's the Frankfort plant boards of the world, of the agency, that distribute it and assure timely and reliable delivery at the local level and provide all the customer service that's needed for connections and disconnections and payment of bills and so forth. This actually was a chart from a Frankfort plant board presentation, and basically if you split up the charges that Frankfort would make to its customers, very roughly, very roundly, 70 to 80% of those charges would go to pay for power supply, that power supply function. 5 to 10% would go to pay for the transmission function, and 20 to 30% would go to pay for what happens in the local community, all the distribution lines, all the customer service, all the running of a local utility. So that's the way it's breaking up. Now, May 1st, 2019, what's changing is the blue area. It's the power supply that's changing. The power supply is still going to be delivered over transmission lines that are operated and maintained and built by LG&E and KU. You know, they have actually a separate business unit that deals with transmission. Right now, Frankfort Plant Board is buying energy from their power supply group. And then that energy is being handed to the transmission group, and then it's being delivered to Frankfort, and Frankfort's delivering it to the customers in the community. So the blue is changing. I'll call it rust, the transmission component, there's going to be a change in who the customer is, but it's still LG&E KU providing that transmission service, and the charges they make for that transmission service will just simply flow through on the bill just like it does today. There would be no difference in that amount of the total bill to the customer. Same with the green area. That's the distribution and customer care part of it. That's not changing. The charges on the bill for that function won't change. Frankfort will continue to provide that service. And that's true of all the other KyMEA members. This is a model that is repeated in all the different KyMEA members that are part of the All Requirements project. So Doug did frankly a tremendous job going toward the fundamental reason that KyMEA was formed. Really, in April of 2014, the members that are now part of the All Requirements project decided to give notice to KU that we're going to terminate our power supply service from you. So that started a ball rolling. Somehow, some way, by May 1st, 2019, that group of people, that group of organizations had to have a new power supply arrangement. So their question is, how are we going to do that? You know, what should we do? How should we approach that problem? And it's been demonstrated since the 1950s, as Doug mentioned, through the 1960s, and with tremendous energy in the 70s and 80s, and that formation of groups of smaller municipals, consolidating them into larger groups has tremendous benefits. So when the group says, how do we go about this? The first answer is join together and approach it together. Cooperate. Don't duplicate efforts. Don't sit there and have, Frankfort doing this and then the next city following the same path. Don't duplicate efforts and work together on it, because there are tremendous economies of scale in the power supply world. They are tremendous. When you talk to a power supplier about purchasing a piece of capacity and energy to fit into a portfolio for even a very large distribution company like Frankfort is, the pricing is different. It's higher. It's more costly than if you talk to the same supplier for about twice as much volume of transaction. In everything that you do, it's like that. Today, as a group, the KyMEA All Requirements members, if you total up all their loads, their peak load in the summer month is just under 300,000 kilowatt hours in the peak hour. That sounds like a lot, but among power supply organizations, that's actually quite small. And Frankfort is half that size. So Frankfort among power supply companies would be quite small. So what you want is economies of scale in arranging for power supply. You'd really love to see 300,000 kilowatts aggregated together and working together, but 500,000 would be better, and 1,000 would be even better when it comes to the power supply world. So the obvious answer to people like us that have been in the industries, I hate to say it, since 1980, is you've got to aggregate together. You got to approach this as a team. You got to run down the road, and the more that you can decide on a portfolio that can meet the needs of the whole group, the greater those economies of scale and avoidance of duplication of effort, the greater those benefits will be to your communities. So let's go after it, okay? And that was really the simple logic. And, well, how do you do that? Well, in the state of Kentucky, you band a group of organizations, municipal organizations like this together through an interlocal cooperation agreement. And that's the way it's done. In other states, there are other laws on the books that allow you to do it different ways. But in the state of Kentucky, you do it through an interlocal cooperative agreement. And that's what happened. Okay. By the time we went from April of 2014 to May of 2015, and now we've got the realization that the group needed to band together formally in this interlocal cooperative agreement, call it KyMEA, and start working together to address the challenges of the future so far as power supply is concerned. The other part to the equation was one of the huge differences now with the termination of the arrangement with KU was the ability for every member to have a voice. When it came to dealing with KU, there was no voice. There was zero voice from this group about what the power supply would be, what kinds of resources it would come from, or what the price would be, what the rates would be, or how often the rates would change. It was all dependent on decisions made by KU's management. And there was no voice. This group had, I think it was said earlier, this group banded together in an informal way for decades to work together to manage their relationship with KU. And they did it very effectively, but that relationship was from the standpoint of trying to be sure that KU did not charge more than they absolutely were allowed to for wholesale power. And that's kind of where the relationship started and stopped, right? Even down, we've talked about SEPA. In the dealing with SEPA, KU would not, in the last several years, would not facilitate the most effective use of this hydroelectric power that each of the all requirements members received from the Southeastern Power Administration. They just said, no, we're not going to help you get the most out of that power that you have. We're not going to cooperate with you. You go deal with that on your own. Well, due to market conditions and other factors for the last several years, the Frankfort Plant Board and the other all requirements members have not been able to maximize the value of SEPA because they didn't have the ability to work together to maximize that value. One of the additional benefits that they're getting by working together is maximizing the value of SEPA, which adds to the benefits of replacing KU as the power supplier. This is the process in kind of a timeline that we've been through, and I thought Doug's timeline was excellent and dead on. This comes at it from, adds a little bit more information in terms of interactions that have gone on, okay? The green boxes are everywhere where the Frankfort Plant Board has been involved in a very substantial decision that has affected where we are today, okay? So the first green box was the Frankfort Plant Board decided to give notice to KU. And then in the summer of 2015, to form KyMEA, the interlocal, through the interlocal cooperative agreement. And then in November 2015, there was a very substantial update of all that was going on at the Frankfort Plant Board. In fact, I was there and I briefed 2 incoming board members, like I recently briefed Ms. Hale, on all that had gone on, why we had gotten where we are, and KyMEA made us available to those board members to completely understand the history of where they were and what was coming down the road. At that time, we were talking about what the all requirements contract would look like. In between that period in July and August, There was the process of negotiating power supply contracts, developing the all requirements contract, and during that entire period, there was a completely interactive process that involved all of the KyMEA all requirements members and all of the representatives sitting around this table and other representatives, Frankfort's representatives at the time. And it was a situation where the group was saying, what is the right way to do this so that we can capture these benefits of aggregating our load and working together, and every member is treated fairly. We don't end up with one member benefiting more than the others by leaning on the others. That's in all of our experience working with joint action agencies. You've got to structure it so that they work together, they stay focused on a particular objective, they go get the benefits of working together, and then the benefits flow to all the members, whether big or small, and one member doesn't benefit at the expense of another member. One member doesn't lay off risk on another member. One member doesn't shift cost to another member. As soon as that starts happening in a group like this, then it's no longer a cooperative agreement. It's no longer a cooperative organization. It's one member abusing another member. And it does terrible destructive damage to a group that's trying to pull together. It's a team here trying to pull together to achieve the common interest and good. But the interaction, and frankly, some of the comments that there wasn't any input are simply not accurate. They're not even close to accurate. In board meetings like this, these members of all the cities, including your representatives, sat there and displayed patience beyond what I could ever imagine to hear out all the different explanations and to debate all the issues. And the common theme every time we met with them is what is right to do as a group so that we can jointly benefit. And that was the theme, and it's always has been the theme, and I frankly hope it always is the theme, because if it is, some of the promises that Doug hoped for in terms of where this organization could go will be realized. If one member comes in here and starts saying, well, I want it to be my way and only my way, then it's going to eliminate the opportunity for this organization to realize its full potential. Okay? And no, my father wasn't a Baptist preacher. So,
Amen.
With regard to all requirement, but you can see that I do believe in what we're doing here. It's been part of my career for too many years, and I really believe in the power of joint action. And part of it is my mentor was one of the guys involved in the 50s and 60s at the very beginning and the seeds of joint action. He had a lot to do with it, and I believe in it because of the nature of the power supply business. There's tremendous value and benefits in working together rather than separately. Now, the all requirements contract. In the simplest terms, this contract basically says that we as a group are going to arrange for all the power supply that's needed by the all requirements members. We're going to arrange for that power supply, and we're going to reliably deliver it to you, and we're essentially contracting with each other to accomplish that as a group. KyMEA is not some distant organization. It's not like KU, where you have a bunch of people that have a totally different set of priorities than yourself. They're in it to provide value to stockholders, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's a very different organization than your organization. You're in it to help each other realize the benefits of joint action. And so the all requirements contract is simply the group decided that the way we're going to go about it is we're going to put together a portfolio. We're going to structure it the best we know how. We're going to manage the risk properly. And it's going to supply all the power that these 8 cities need to serve their customers. And that's the way we're going to structure it. And there were other ways to structure it on our advice and the advice of others. That was the best way, and the way that would be most likely to produce the most benefit by acting together to meet these challenges of the future. So that's all this contract is about. And it's a lot of words, and the way it was developed is it basically also has to establish, well, what do we do about member resources? Every member in here does have SEPA. Berea does not, but they're not part of the all requirements group right now. But all the all requirements group does have SEPA. How do we interact with each other about our own resources? And the simple principle was let the agency use it, maximize its value, and deliver that value to the members that have it under contract. And that's what's being done. That's what's being proposed. Okay. As Doug said so eloquently, this is intended to be a long-term relationship. Power supply is a long-term issue, and it takes years to do things. Even today, given all the advantages we have today and the types of resources we build, leading power companies that build assets take 3-4 years to put something in the ground. 5 years when you start including all the pre-planning and other effort that goes before it, sometimes longer. 5 and 10 and 20 years in the power supply world is not a long time. It's a long-term place. The assets you put in the ground, the cost of investment in them have to be spread over 25, 30, 35 years to make sense, because you're putting a lot of bricks and mortar, a lot of equipment in the ground. You're making a huge investment. You have to spread it over that time. That's why we end up talking about contracts that are 10 years long, or 20 years long. That's part of the business. So the contract, for it to work right, it has to balance the collective interest with the individual interest. And basically the group sat around the table and said, we want you to tell us how to maximize our collective interest, how to get the maximum benefit collectively. And we're willing to put aside a little bit of individualism to maximize that collective interest. And that's what they did. And that's the way the contract is written, so that the group works together to establish a common portfolio, and by doing that captures the most in terms of economies of scale. And that's what the group is about. And that's what the all requirement contract is about. It's not intended to beat one member up at the expense of another. It's intended to be sure everybody shares in the jointly achieved benefits fairly. And fairly generally relates to the size of their load. That's generally fairly, what fairly means. So how was it developed? There's been a lot of concern that it sort of was sprung on the members. That just isn't true. The group, the board, worked on it for over 6 months. And every month there would be reports back to the Frankfort Plant Board about what's going on. There were discussions. the legal counsel for the plant board was involved in reviewing the contract and providing input. And he was involved in hearing all the debates as to how we should do this, how should the voting work, what should this provision be? And that went on for 6 months at every meeting like this, and we would, I'm sure we spent an hour or two at each monthly meeting over a 6-month period talking about various issues. How should we do this? And then that contract went out to all the cities, and all the cities had an opportunity to have their legal counsel review, and we got some very helpful feedback. Well, maybe you ought to reword this a little bit or redo this a little bit, and all those suggestions and that input was incorporated. And then we got to July of 2016, and we made a very thorough presentation, presented materials that summarized it. The plant board had heard it. They had heard explanations leading up to it. They heard it in July, and we came back a month later. The plant board chose to vote to approve it. It wasn't sprung on anybody in the last minute. That characterization is simply false and wrong, and it just didn't happen that way. I was there. A couple points about the contract. I think this governance notion, the way the board settled on this governance notion, in my view, might have been, I hope it proves out over time to be as good of an idea and as great of a balance as I think it will be. You know, you have members among this 8 cities that are very different in size. You have very small to, Frankfort at the high end, and Madisonville kind of in between toward the high end. And the question was, how could you set a group of people around a table, make sure they all had a voice in representing their communities in every decision that an organization like this will be faced with over the next 20 or 30 or 40 or, like many of them, 50 years? How do you structure it so that works? So the way it was structured is every decision is first made by one person, one vote. So even the smallest member has a vote. But to protect the largest members, if there's a vote that the largest members didn't think quite was right, they only have one vote to say no. And there could be circumstances where smaller members did some things that just put a lot of weight financially on the larger members, and yet the larger member still only has one vote to say no. So the larger members can say, no, I really don't think this is a good idea. I want a weighted vote. And now there's a weighted vote. And if it doesn't pass on a weighted vote, it doesn't pass. And you go back to square one, and the board goes back to square one. I got a little off there, but thanks. So on this board, you have one member from every community, and then you have an alternate to be available when they're not there. And then when they vote, it's one person, one vote on every issue. And then if the larger member doesn't like the outcome, they can say, let's vote on a weighted basis. And if they say that and it doesn't pass on a weighted basis, it doesn't impose the larger member's will on the group. Instead, it says, let's go back to work and figure out something that we can all pass. And it sort of sends it back to the drawing board. And I thought the board in coming up with that was frankly quite wise in structuring that kind of a voting situation. KyMEA is going to have the all requirements group, but it's also going to have other members that need other kinds of services. And so there'll be different arrangements and different contracts between KyMEA and those other members. For instance, we've talked about the all requirements group. That's the first reading across that's kind of shaded in a light tan area. For that group of people, KyMEA intends to provide all the planning of power supply, 24/7 dispatching and scheduling of resources. In other words, there'll be people at a desk monitoring the loads throughout all those 8 communities and scheduling resources to be delivered to those communities to meet those loads on a real-time basis. Because the power has to be scheduled right as it's being consumed, and you have to match the deliveries to what's being demanded by the customers, right? So the broadest range of services is the all requirements group. But the concept was for OMU, they didn't need the same level of services because they had their own power plant. They had their own power supply. Now that's changing over time. OMU may become an all requirements member at some point, but they had a different need. So they said, you know, what we could really benefit from is let's join with you in doing the 24/7 scheduling and dispatching. There'll be a lot of savings to us, and when we get ready to plan new power supply, we're going to try to work with the agency and see if there's a way to do that more effectively than standing on their own. Now, Owensboro is a much bigger system than even Frankfort. They're another step up. So, and then there's Berea and Benham, and right now they have other power supply arrangements. So what they would like is some assistance with transmission, and that's what the agency is doing. Now, over time, members can be added. The role of the members in the organization can change. Berea might become an all requirements member at some point, or Benham might become an all requirements member. The organization is flexible enough to meet the needs, and it all boils down to we're going to do whatever creates mutual benefit, and we're going to allocate our cost in a way that makes sense. Power supply. As I've said a couple times, power supply is a long-term matter. It's many, many years. A 3-year contract for power supply is extremely short. A 10-year contract is on the shorter end. 20-year contract, when you build a plant, you're committing to pay its cost over usually 30 or 35 or 40 years. Okay, it's a long-term business. This is the power supply that's been structured so far. And just to note that there's a big change that would happen naturally under the current contracts June 1 of 2022. At that time, there's a coal contract, a contract for coal capacity that will end. That's with a company called Dynergy. That'll end at that time, and the intention, in fact, we're working on another contract with another supplier to provide a natural gas combined cycle resource to fill in that spot where that coal will be. Now, that's important because I know a lot of people are interested in seeing, in Frankfort, are interested in seeing a lessening dependence on coal and a lessening carbon footprint. It's built into the portfolio that would occur June 1, 2022. In fact, the carbon footprint will go down by an amount exceeding the requirements of the Paris Accord, June 1, 2022. That's 3 years before the commitment under the Paris Accord. So not only have you been able to develop a power supply plan that's sensibly manages risk, that puts you in a competitive position, that provides you financial benefits for your community, but it's progressively moving you in a position that many would feel very good about in terms of lessening the carbon footprint and improving. But things like this don't happen overnight, not responsibly. They happen over time, and you build them and you manage and balance the financial realities with all the social things that you'd really like to accomplish, but you can't flip a switch, and it can't happen today without really hurting yourself. And that's what's going on here. You notice, as Doug said earlier, by the time you get to 2022, this is the capacity. This is, in power supply, there's production capacity. That's like a plant. How many widgets can it produce an hour? That's its capacity to produce something, okay? And this is the capacity to meet your peak load that's being described here. But you can see there's a lot of different kinds of resources and different fuels and contract terms that are different. There's a lot of diversity in the portfolio. This is energy. This is the energy that's actually being consumed in the community. You can see to the left, that pie chart is typical of the period May 2019 through May of 2022, and it's heavily coal. And the reason it was like that, as we worked and examined the alternatives out there, there wasn't a good natural gas combined cycle alternative out there to be sure it would be available by May of 2019 to start delivering power to this group. We had a great contract in terms of low cost for a sort of a stopgap period from Dynergy. The agency chose to go with it to get them to a point where they could be more assured that we have time to get a natural gas combined cycle resource under contract. We're not sitting there with a gun to our head. We can make the choice of the best resource that'll be good for the agency over a long period of time. And you can see in the period June 2022 through May 2029, it's a much different picture. And if I thought about it, I would have done the carbon footprint graph, and the amount of carbon being produced is a lot less, because the light green area, the natural gas combined cycle, produces a little bit less than half as amount of carbon for each megawatt hour that it produces than coal does. And you notice there's a yellow area. That's the solar that we're working on right now. And there's a blue area, and that's the hydroelectric that the group of cities has available to them from the Southeastern Power Administration. So there's a diverse resource, and that portfolio by June of 2022 is extremely different, more diverse, and less carbon producing intensive than KU's portfolio, significantly less. So when you go through the portfolio scorecard, what has happened here is that the left column, the objective, those were the objectives set by this board. And, we had numerous discussions, numerous ways of wording them. We went through it time and again. First of all, the objective was go find a way to get us more affordable electricity, because that's good for our communities in every respect. And then, oh, by the way, don't bet on a single future occurring. Do it in a way where it'll be more affordable under a lot of different future conditions, because we can't predict really what the future. Who could have predicted 2 years ago that the Tax Act would have just passed? Okay? Anyone ready to predict that 2 years ago? I wasn't. Who could predict 2-3 years ago that the Clean Power Plan would not be implemented? Most everybody would have been betting on that being implemented. You just can't predict the future. So you build power supplies so it works under a lot of different futures, and that's been a big part of the watchword here. And then, oh, by the way, we really don't want to mess up. We want it there May 2019. We don't want any stress in our communities about whether there's going to be reliable power supply and what it's going to cost. So you may sacrifice some things. You may put off achieving some goals. We want it there May 2019, and let's not have any doubt about that. That's been a watchword from day one. And then fourth, not because it's not as important, but because it's the reality of life. Now, we want you to do all of that and do it in the most environmentally responsible manner that you can help us figure out how to do it. That has been, and that's what the organization has done. Okay. Now, starting with the first one, at the very beginning, we sat around this board and we said, what is most important in your community? There are some places where they would have said, no matter what, we want to eliminate every part of our carbon footprint. There are some places where that would be true. That wasn't true in these communities. What we heard was, it's very important to people to do the right thing, but in our communities, we need stable, reliable, less costly, more affordable power. That's first. And go do everything else you can to make it more environmentally responsible. And to your credit, and to the board's credit, that is being accomplished. It really is. Sorry. Wrong button. So I want to close in this presentation. Thank you for your indulgence, but there's two kinds of benefits that every member, all requirements member, is going to receive from this arrangement. One, lower cost of capacity and energy needed to serve the customers. That's the power supply that we've been talking about. That's projected to be the case. In the next presentation, you're going to see a little bit more, detail on that particular topic. Plus, higher benefits of the Southeastern Power Administration hydroelectric power that each member has available to it, because KyMEA has been able to build into the portfolio the more effective use of that power supply resource that you've had a long time. There's been a lot of benefits from it, but in the last few years, those benefits haven't been so good. Those two things together add up to more affordable electricity. The first one, you're going to hear later that the initial set of rates that the agency would adopt would be, that we're projecting right now, would be 14% lower than what the cities are right now paying KU. So that's a level of benefit. The second one, Frankfort would receive benefits for its SEPA capacity, value for its SEPA capacity that there isn't a way for them to receive right now. The left box, relative to the current rates, would push Frankfort's costs down about $6 million a year. The right box would push it down closer to $800,000 a year. These are real numbers that matter to your community. And it's against the existing rates. You've done something that you can be very proud of, and you've done it in a very responsible way. The last chart just summarizes the benefits we've talked about. I think I've gone through that well enough. Does anyone have any questions that I can try to address? My dad wasn't a Baptist preacher, but I grew up in a Baptist church.
Amen.
Thank you, John.
There is one question from the audience, if that's okay.
I just wanted you to repeat, you said $6 million less for Frankfort on the one hand, and what was the other number?
Of the order of 700, 800,000 more value for SEPA. And that $6 million is less than the existing rates that KU is charging right at this moment. KU's rates are going to change over time, and it could be more or less, but that's compared to the existing rate levels.
Thank you.
What is keeping us from getting more value from SEPA now? If you give it.
In a word, without getting, market conditions in a word. It's just not practical for you to sell to somebody the value of its capacity. You can sell its energy, but not the value of its capacity. And there's risks and there's not the opportunity and KU won't help you get the value. So you're kind of stuck just taking the value of the energy. KyMEA can use it in a way that captures the value of its capacity.
So, just so I understand, in 2022, the carbon footprint goes down because we diversify the portfolio with more
Natural gas.
green natural gas, so to speak. And then Frankfort saves up to $600,800,000. Sorry, $6,800,000 in 1 year.
Relative to the current KU
Sure, the
rates.
current cost. Would that savings continue as the years progress?
It'll continue, but the rate will move up and down.
Right.
And one of the issues that'll impact it is the recently passed Tax Act.
Right.
Will benefit KU and narrow that sum.
Okay.
Okay, but it'll go up and down as conditions change.
But there will be some savings as
Yeah.
time goes on. And then, as a group, what is the potential savings for the entire, for all of the members combined of KyMEA?
Well,
ballpark.
Frankfurt's just a little bit more than half of the all requirements members.
Right.
So you can almost double those numbers,
Okay.
and you'd come very close.
Thank you.
John, is Annette's question addressed in the indicative rate proposal? There's hard numbers in that proposal coming up.
The corporation, KU is a corporation that will benefit from lower corporate taxes, but the municipal will not. And there is a movement to get utilities cost reduced. Does that affect us?
Well, there's always movement to reduce utilities costs, but,
Well, because of the savings to the corporations.
well, let me defer to another time where we really need to stay on task here. And there is a public period a little bit later, but
Okay, sorry.
I don't mean to shut you off, but I kind of opened it to the floor, and I didn't. I want to be respectful of all the board has a lot of stuff on the agenda today. Are there any other questions from members of the board?
Thank you, John. We'll move on to the next item, the preliminary AR rates and budget. Chris, got the right Chris.
Take it away, Chris.
We presented a rate schedule at the December meeting. I want to thank John and Brown and everybody for helping put this together. Everybody needs to understand that this is a preliminary rate schedule, but I think it meets the requirements of everything that we've, for KyMEA and for the municipals. I'd ask John to put on the presentation if he would.
John, what do you need me to pull up?
The PowerPoint presentation, please. We're going to review the purpose of what we're doing right now, and then talk about how what we're doing right now is going to be updated toward the end of this year, the very first part of next year. That will be the final rate that is adopted and put into effect. This is not the rate that will be put in effect. Several of the members said, look, we know there's a lot of development that has to go on, but we need some indicative rate. We need to look at what it's going to look like earlier in the process to facilitate our planning. We do 3 and 5 year budgets. We just need to see more earlier. So this was an effort to do that. And then we're going to talk about the process, what you go through to set the rates of this kind of an organization, the projected revenues and costs, the competitive comparison, and the highlights. So that's what's on the agenda. It's already been said by Chris, this is to help with the planning process. It also helps you start to get your arms around what are the questions that we're going to deal with next year or later this year when we set the final rate. What are the decisions? What are the things that we need to think about as we set the rates? So this is kind of a dry run, and you'll come back at it again, say in the fourth quarter, and hopefully by January of 2019, you'll be ready to adopt a rate schedule. Uploaded to the portal is actually a first draft of that rate schedule that you can go through and consider. It follows the form of KU's rate schedule in terms of the overall structure, but it's been changed to reflect the realities of the way this organization works. Okay. There's a whole series of things that will have to be updated when we get, and that's why it wouldn't be good at this time to settle on a final rate. Okay. There's going to be new load forecast, and there's going to be, Doug started talking about staffing plans and how the whole structure of the organization. All of that is going to be progressed dramatically in 2018. There's going to be additional decisions made about power supply resources. There's going to be updates to fuel and market energy prices, and just several items you'll know a lot more about by the end of the year. That's why it's sort of a two-step process. So for an organization like this, how are the rate sets? What do you have to consider? I think you're probably familiar with it as board members, what you do in your own community and the budgeting process and everything. In this kind of a organization, you start with what's the load forecast? And NewGen prepared that load forecast in September of 2017, and they'll update it next year, and you'll have a fresh load forecast to work with. You got to look at the administrative cost. And because there's different kinds of members that are being provided different services, the agency will start with, this is our total cost of administration, and then they'll allocate it to the various groups of members in a way that fairly reflects the cost of providing that service to those members. You got to put in place the arrangements to have adequate working capital. You're starting on day one running a business. You don't have any material amount of cash in the bank to manage the working capital needs. So there's a process of putting that in place, and there's a cost to it. We've made a very conservative allowance for that in this presentation, but in the next few months, the plans for how that's all to be done will be finalized, and the final plan will be taken into account. Then you've got to project out all of the costs based on the latest information under all these contracts. What are the capacity payments going to be? How much energy are we going to use under each contract? What is the cost of that energy going to be? How much are we going to buy from the market? All of those various aspects. Have we entered into any contracts to sell some to anyone other than the all requirements group? All of that needs to be considered. In particular, you need to focus on the potential for purchases and sales and evaluate that and consider how to take into account in setting rates. And then once you get to that point, you have all of the costs that have to be recovered, and then you have to classify it. Is it demand or energy or fuel related? You put it in different buckets, and that translates into different components of a rate schedule, because the load characteristics of all these members are not the same. they should pay different proportions of the cost you incurred to meet demand, the peak use of energy in the summer, versus the cost you incurred to supply energy all year round. So there's a need to put it in different buckets and develop different rate components to fairly distribute the cost. And then you design those rates, the different components of the rates. The rate structure, there's going to be a demand charge. That'll be a rate multiplied by the peak demand for electricity of each member in each month. Then there'll be a base energy charge, which will be a rate multiplied by the total amount of energy used in the month. There'll be an energy cost adjustment clause that passes through variances between what you estimated your energy cost would be, your fuel cost primarily, and what they actually turn out to be, because commodity prices change during the year. And then there'll be a charge that passes through the LG&E KU transmission charges that are incurred by the agency to provide transmission service. So those will be the four basic components of the rate structure. The demand charge, as I mentioned, is intended to cover those fixed costs, those capacity charges that you incur so you have enough capacity to meet your peak load in the summer months. That's what the demand charge is about. The energy charge passes through the actual cost of producing or purchasing the energy that your consumers consume. Okay? And that, by the way, that structure is very comparable to the structure of KU's wholesale rates right now. This is a schedule that shows a projection of the cost of service, the total cost of service for meeting the needs of the all requirements members out through the end of fiscal year 2023. So it's the first column is 2 months, May and June of 2019. And then the other columns are the period ended June of 2020, June of 2021, and so forth. So this takes you out through June of 2023, the end of that fiscal year. You can, couple things, you can see that on line 5, those are the totality of what the agency would be spending under these contracts to obtain power to deliver it to the members. So like I'm going to refer to the first full year, 2020, $65.6 million. That's going to be spent under these contracts to have capacity and buy energy. Then line 8 is there's not only the transmission charges paid to LG&E KU, but also other charges that are paid to MISO. That's just under $7 million. That'll be there. We've allowed on line 11 $2 million to fund the cost of assuring that you have enough working capital. We feel very confident that that is a very conservative estimate of that cost. The way you're going to do that is you're going to have a line of credit, you're going to draw down that line, you're going to have some debt that puts money in your bank and allows you to function with a certain amount of money. Then you're going to have a line of credit to draw on from time to time, and there's going to be fees associated with that line of credit. In total, you call that sort of a liquidity package. And you have to have, if a power supply entity needs to have 90 to 120 days worth of their expenses to be sure they can function appropriately in terms of working capital. And that's an allowance for the cost of putting that in place. And then 12 and 13 are the all requirements members share of administrative cost and the outsourced 24/7 dispatch and scheduling operation. So the total projected costs total up to $76.5 million in that first year. And then we've done some analyses on the uncertainties, how one of the principal uncertainties will be, what will your billing demands be? Because just due to your costs are relatively fixed on the capacity side, but just due to weather conditions and other factors, your billing demands could be lower than you forecast them to be. And so you allow for that contingency, you build that into the rate, and if your billing demands come closer to what you project, you'll end up with a little bit of money that can be set aside to be used in future periods. And the agency stays liquid, it stays in good financial health, and it builds its financial strength over time. So that's what that rate contingency and rate stabilization is about. So in total, it adds up to right at $80 million. That would be the annual group of charges to the 8 all requirements members. And then there would be separate charges to other KyMEA members for the services and the things that KyMEA is doing for those other members. So you would see a budget for KyMEA that in total would be larger than that. This is just the portion of it for the all requirements group. When you take those costs and you classify them as demand and energy and transmission, and you calculate what the rates need to be, you end up with this structure. The first column of numbers shows you what the current rates are that KU charges for each of these components. You can see that, for instance, the demand charge is $17.18 per kilowatt per month. So for that demand charge, let's say that Frankfort's demand was 150,000 kilowatts, the peak demand in a month. You would multiply 150,000 times $17.18, and that would be the demand charge. That's the way it goes. And then Frankfort would use a certain amount of energy in a month. You would multiply that amount of energy toward the rates, and that would be the energy charge, the rate shown on lines 2 and 3. The second column of numbers are the rates that have been projected, these indicative rates starting out at the beginning for the all requirements members. You can see that they're lower. The demand charge would be 14% lower than KU's current rate. The energy charge in total would be 14% lower. And the transmission charge, as we've said, that's a pass-through, and it's not going to be any different than it would have been and that it has been if you're taking service from KU or if you're working through the agency. So there's no change in that part of the cost. So the demand charge is 14% lower. The energy charge would be 14% lower. What that does, by having both of those charges roughly the same percentage lower, it more uniformly distributes the benefits of the agency across the all requirements members. Because some members use more energy for every unit of capacity they need or demand they have, and some use less. And by having both charges lower than KU's, it more uniformly distributes the benefits among the members.
John?
Yes, sir.
On line 2, the disparity between the KU energy rates versus KyMEA's, are some of those administrative costs? What can you describe non-fuel?
I
know it's a
KU, for instance, has a large amount of fuel handling kinds of cost, including return on investment on fuel handling equipment, that are boiled into that charge. The agency's contracts don't separate that out as a separate charge. So the agency, because it's so much coal up front, they don't have the same level of non-fuel charges that KU would have. That's the principal difference there, and that's why it's so much lower. Once you get beyond June of 2022, what you see is that charge moves up a little bit because now there's some additional payments toward the natural gas combined cycle resource, but the demand rate comes down a little bit to compensate.
But comparatively, KU will continue to have the need to invest in environmental improvements in their infrastructure. So comparatively, it keeps KyMEA in a positive.
Well,
next slide. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hadn't seen the presentation, by the way.
So, for reference, what you see in your formula rate today, as far as the calculation annually, you see that non-fuel coming out of the formula rate. The other charges on there are not part of the formula rate. What's shown there is $22.95. That's the combination of the base fuel and your monthly fuel adjustment clause.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that 485 comes out of formula rate. That's all it comes out of, not as far as the energy component. And of course, all the demand charge there, 17 and 18, comes out of the formula rate.
Okay. Now, want the board to understand that KU's rates won't be static. As we've all been talking about, they still have a schedule of environmental compliance related investment and other investment they continue to make on their system. As they invest, and the formula rate is updated every year, their rates to the wholesale customers are pressed in the upward direction. Okay. The loss of the AR members' load will mean that they have a lot of fixed costs and they'll have less load over which to spread that fixed cost. So that puts upward pressure on their system, on their rates. Changes, increases or decreases in fuel costs and other operating expenses flow right through the rate every year. So that'll usually provide upward pressure on the rate. From time to time, it goes the other way. Okay. So those are the things that are pressing upward on KU's rates. The 2018 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act will lower their federal tax rate significantly. In the past, their federal tax rate has averaged right at 35% that is factored into the cost of service. Under that new act, it'll be 21%. That's a huge reduction in their cost. Percentage-wise, total, it's not that huge. It's 3-4%. Okay. It's a material improvement in cost. And you'll see that talked about, you'll see that debated as to how to deal with that. The Public Service Commission will deal with that. The recent article that I read said that the impact on the various utilities could be anywhere from 3 to 7%, was one article I read. You might have read other articles. The reason it can go higher than 3 to 4% is there's some adjustments that might be made on how to deal with certain deferred income taxes. And if I start trying to explain deferred income taxes to you, you'll start crying. But generally, it has to do with you pay taxes as a customer in your rates that the utility doesn't pay until some later year. Okay, and that creates, you've paid the tax, but they haven't yet paid it. And now that the tax rate has changed, there's some adjustments that have to be made as to how to deal with that. It's a timing issue. It's how long in the future do you make those adjustments that'll affect how it affects rates. Okay. If you made them all in 1 year, it would have a big effect on the rates. If you make it over a more sensible time, it'll spread that effect out, and it may have almost no effect on rates. So there's a lot of a lot of debate that's going to go on about how to deal with that. And that's not just going to be in Kentucky, that's going to be everywhere. Okay. There also are some charges in your current rate schedule that have been accelerated, where you've been paying for some environmental compliance costs that they have wanted to recover before you terminate your contract. Those will tend to go away or be treated differently for remaining customers. So that'll be a factor. And those tend to provide some relief on the rates. Now, which is going to balance out controlling it? That's a little hard to tell right now. The Tax Act is a very positive thing for customers, and it'll have a noticeable effect on KU's rates in the short term, and it just will. So the messages I want to emphasize are the cost and rates in this presentation are for your planning purposes. They aren't ready to be approved for May 1, 2019. But it's also good that you see how this is all fitting together and you can start thinking about the issues and about the way we've handled things. Rate stability. If you noticed on these charts, line 42 is the projected average cost of the power supply component, the demand in the energy charges. Notice that 42, that level doesn't change very much. In fact, this model goes further out to 2029, and that level doesn't change very much. There's nothing in any of the projections that we've done that make us believe that you're going to see material rate increases in your base rate. Fuel prices might go up, might go down further, but those will flow through the energy cost adjustment factor. Your base rate is projected to be very stable. The other thing I wanted to mention here that I apologize I skipped over, line 17, margin on sales to others. As we worked with Chris and Josh and they provided input to what we were doing, one of the goals here was to be conservative in these projections. And be conservative in the way you plan your finances as you get started so that you stay nice and strong, you're liquid, you're in good shape as you move forward. We have projected you will have the opportunity to make sales from some of the resources that you're buying under contract, turn around and sell some energy from those resources and make a margin on it. We've estimated that margin could be $2 to $4 million a year. $4 million is 5% of your total cost. That's a noticeable amount of money. We've left that out of these projections for conservatism. There's several places in the projections where we've been conservative. In the first 3 years, you may have an opportunity to make some capacity sales because you'll have a little bit of extra capacity. We have not included those revenues in this presentation. When it comes time to set your rates, what you'll generally want to do is not count on those opportunity sales. Basically set your rate and let those benefits and margins come to you, set them aside, add them to the contribution to the rate stabilization fund, and then use it in future periods. Now it's a real number. It's money in your account. If you try to project them and set your rates projecting the level of those benefits as they move around, you'll create too much instability and uncertainty in what your rates are going to be for the coming year or 2 years. You want your rates to be more stable and predictable.
with that.
And so we've been conservative in this. The whole team wanted to be. Josh and Chris were wonderful in all the time they spent on this and providing direction and input. And remember that at the end of this year, a lot of details in it will change. The overall picture won't change very much. We think we've biased it so that the rate you adopt will be the same or maybe a little bit lower. But it could be a little higher too, depending on some circumstances. And starting out, this rate would be lower than the current rate KU's charging by a very significant margin. And there's all the projections continue to support that you would remain competitive. The Tax Act may put a narrowing pressure on that, but it won't erase it. There's a lot of information that follows that's in the form of an appendix. It goes into a lot more detail. It's there for your consumption, your reference. And as you look through it, we're not going to spend the time to take you through all that. As you look through it, feel free to let us know. And if you have questions, we can discuss it at a subsequent board meeting. Are there any questions on it so far? And I think I mentioned, but in case I didn't, there is a draft, an initial draft of the rate schedule. That's for your review and consumption. And as time moves on, you'll have more time to, delve into that and provide more detailed comments and input before it's adopted. But it's a good first, real good first cut at it. Brown, would you like to add anything, or Josh or Chris?
I'd just like to reiterate the corporations by the AR rates group, Chris and Josh. Also wanted to make sure that I've reinforced things you said several times, and that is the preliminary budget and the draft rates that are put out there. It's the intention and understanding of everyone that the budgets will be refined fourth quarter of this year, along with the accompanying rates. And probably the board will probably act on approving those first quarter of 19 for implementation May 1 of 19. But again, this is response to several requests for refinement of cost information, and that was the intent to put this preliminary budget and draft rate schedule out at this time.
Chris or Josh, any comment?
The biggest comment I've got on it is, regardless of what the tax break does for KU, we're saving 14% on our energy costs. Even if they come down and it's only 8%, it's still 14% on what we're paying now. So that's the big number. What their projected rate is really has no bearing on us other than the fact that what we're paying for electricity.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Chris, that they're always and forever going to have return on equity.
Sure.
And they're going to have a tax burden.
Sure.
And the municipal group, this agency, will not have those two things.
And it's going to fluctuate, and comparing it to their rate all the time, at some point we're going to have to stop that and see what we're doing. We're paying 14% of that.
I would also offer you, we work in a lot of places around the United States. I think Doug may echo this, but those are very attractive wholesale, all requirements, power cost levels.
I will echo that. These are very good rates.
Yeah. Whatever was going on.
I'll echo that. I mean, in the Southeast, which has always been known for having some of the lowest rates in the country, generally speaking, in the Southeast. I could not number the clients that would love to have a rate in that magnitude. Okay, I know of literally hundreds of municipals and/or co-ops that would love to have a rate like that.
So congratulations, not only did you have the guts to go try to do this, but you were in the market at the right time, you got it done, and it's coming together quite nicely.
Thank you, John.
We have a resolution here. We have a resolution that we need to approve on the indicative rate proposal. Has everyone had a chance to look at that?
Well, I'll make a recommendation that we accept the resolution for the indicative rate proposal.
I'll second that.
That was a motion.
Do we don't need to read that into the record, or just as presented in the?
It is in the record, and you'll be voting on what was on the portal.
Okay, that's what I
Which you have
so,
a copy of. Let me, real question, it's an excellent question, Mr. Chairman. There's a two-step process in the rate proposals that will occur throughout KyMEA's life, and that is for the all requirements rate, the group that came up with this proposal was the All Requirements Project Committee. They come up with the methodology, which John presented and Chris presented, and then the next step is, and they have approved this, and they're recommending to the board to approve it. The board approves it to make sure that the board as a whole is doing the right thing. And so, yes, every member on this board has a right to vote for this rate proposal because it's already been approved by the All Requirements Project Committee.
And the reason we keep talking about Chris is because he's the chairman of the All Requirements Project.
And isn't it too, by the bylaws, anything project committees do has to ultimately be approved by the total board? Right?
Certainly anything that creates potentially a liability for the board, yes. Now, the board, under the All Requirements contract, the All Requirements Project Committee determines the rate schedule, and as long as it's considered reasonable, the board will go along with their recommendation. So that's really what the board does, not the committee.
So we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. So approved. Now we're to our public comment period. Do we have any more questions or comments?
I'll make a small note that the portal says 3 minutes per speaker, and I will change that to be reflected in the minutes, but it will be 5 minutes. That's my understanding. Charlie? Ron?
Yes.
Charlie?
Yes.
Yes, 5 minutes.
If someone would like to speak, we would ask them to go up to the podium and state their name and an organization, if you're from a particular organization, and ask your question or make your comment. So.
My name is Libby Marshall. I'm a resident here of Frankfort and a satisfied customer of the Frankfort Plant Board. I want to welcome all of you here, especially good friends that are always welcomed and good to see again. I am retired. My last position was with the Kentucky Municipal Electric Power Association. I'm sorry, I didn't say that quite right, did I, Annette? Municipal Electric Power Association of Kentucky. So I have worked for the folks who are here today. I want to thank you for bringing such valuable information to us. there has been so much misinformation, and I think even misrepresentation of both KyMEA and the All Requirements contract. And you have clarified so many things today, and we appreciate that. I have not been involved in this for a number of years, but these contracts go in 5- and 10-year intervals. So I was actually working on many of these issues when I was a part of the association. I met with Joint Action Agency leaders from around the country as we examined the question of what to do after KU, because it was clear that KU would not always be a good partner for the municipal utilities of Kentucky. And what I want to say to my fellow Frankfort customers is that KyMEA has been organized not only to ensure continued low rates for all of us as customers, but to protect our public ownership of this utility, which is one of the most important assets we have as a community. And this group has we're talking 2015 here, but I know it goes back much further than that. We have talked about what structure would be needed to protect our public ownership in each of these cities. And I thank you for the hard work that has been done. I might add that the reason 10 years ago that we weren't in this exact position is because of the good work of Tom Trauger, who went through the federal energy regulatory filings of KU and found a negotiating plum to get us another 10 years from KU of some of the lowest rates in the country. So we have been served for 30 years in Frankfort and all of these cities by an outstanding team of advisors. Tom Brown, John I haven't worked with, but these individuals are respected around the country as experts in public power. Frankfort Plant Board has spent over $100,000 in outside contracts to second guess the work of individuals who know more about this than anyone else in the country. And if you were to see them on the national stage, you would understand how well served we are by this team of advisors. So I say to my fellow ratepayers in Frankfort, we are in good hands. We are undertaking a major transformation that is much more sophisticated than Frankfort Plant Board on the electric side has ever done. But we are well advised, and we are working together with other municipal utilities who have been our partners for years. We have the common goal of protecting our public ownership and serving all of us who benefit as municipal utility customers. Thank you all so much.
Hello, my name is Dean Flannery. I want to thank you all for an excellent, very professional presentation. Just a couple of quick questions. The presentations that were here, the PowerPoints and everything, will they be made public or available? Could they be? I think it would be good for people who couldn't be here to see Mr. Borsch's excellent portfolio and all the good things that you gave us today. One of the things you mentioned was your expertise in the IRPs. I just have one question. Is that in the offing to have an IRP developed by this committee?
We'll always be We'll always be developing IRPs. That'll be a part of our planning process. They've been done in the past. That's how we built the power supply portfolio. But we'll continue that process on.
Is there a timeline on that? Will it be before the 2019, or is that something that'll happen later?
Generally, IRPs are done in 2 or 3 year cycles. We'll figure out where we're at after we get the power supply secured, and then we'll come up with the cycle that we want to kind of go through. In my experience, we do planning every year. IRP, the administrative aspects of writing a written report actually take a lot of time. So even though you're constantly perhaps putting together some long-term planning, you might not formally do a report as often as every year.
Okay, and the supplement that you mentioned, Supplement A, you said it's out there for review. Is that by this body, or is that for everybody? Is that on the website somewhere?
It's attached to the presentation.
Okay.
And they're all on the portal.
They're all on the portal?
The answer to your question is yes, they're all.
That is for public
that was my main
consumption.
question.
If you need a copy, I know the Frankfort Plant Board would have copies of all of this.
Just to reiterate, on the Frankfort Plant Board website, there's a link to this public section where those presentations are.
Good.
So everything that you've seen today, you can pull off of the KyMEA portal.
Wonderful.
Go ahead.
It's under the electric tab on there. You'll go to electric, and then
Okay.
you'll have KyMEA Board Meetings on our website.
Okay,
And if you have any problems finding that, you'll feel free to give us a call. We'll walk you through it.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
With there are no other public comments, do we want to address the upcoming meetings? You want to handle that? Who wants to handle that?
Okay, so this is our current schedule of upcoming KyMEA board meetings. Next month in February, we will return to our regular meeting facility in Bowling Green at BGMU. So February and March 22nd are both at 10 a.m. Central Time in Bowling Green. In April, we will follow KMUA and to Cumberland Falls. I believe that's right, Annette. I'm hoping. Yes, okay. We try to piggyback just for efficiency purposes, if nothing else. Most of these members, all of these members are members of KMUA, so when they have their quarterly meeting, we try to piggyback and just do it there where everyone already is. So, yeah, so all of this is, our regular meetings are at Bowling Green at 10 a.m. Central Time. So the fourth Thursday of each month. So if you ever want to find us, that's the normal place. And then anytime that we move it will be a special meeting. The only weird one is June. And the Bowling Green facility is not available in June. So we'll have to have a special meeting at that time.
Motion to go into closed session.
We do have closed session.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, there is a need for a closed session today. I'll read the resolution in just a minute. I would assume that you will take a short 5-minute break before you go into closed session. Closed session is limited to those directors and alternates and the staff members that are needed. Ms. Hale, as a commissioner of the Frankfort Plant Board, you are allowed to remain in the closed session. I think Mr. Ludwig's gone, and I don't believe there's any other governing board members out there, but you are more than welcome to stay and listen to the presentation. Mr. Chairman, if you're ready, I'll read the resolution to go into closed session. This is a motion to approve to enter into closed session pursuant to KRS 61.8101K and 61.8781C for the purpose of presenting and discussing the proposals received in response to the RFP for renewable resources and updating the negotiation proceedings. And 2, to present and discuss the proposals received in response to the natural gas combined cycle resource RFP and updating the negotiation proceedings. KRS 61.8101K and 61.8781C allow for closed session where discussions regarding records or information disclosed to the agency or required to be disclosed to the agency as confidential or proprietary would, if disclosed by the agency, provide an unfair advantage to the competitors of the entity disclosing such information.
So moved.
Second.
favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're now in closed session.
Okay, who's going to adjourn?
Thank you.